So no trend panel is complete without kind of a roll call of some buzzwords. So I'm going to mention 5 buzzwords or phrases. Take your pick on which one or two of these resonate as particularly significant for your work in the arts field, and just elaborate on the impact for you and your work. Number 1, data. Number 2, creative placemaking. Number 3, design thinking. Number 4, maker culture. And number 5, collective impact. And Emma, I'm going to pick on you to start to mix it up a little bit.
So the one that jumps out to me immediately is data, just because we are such a data-driven company. So is eBay, our parent company. It's something that we kind of live and breathe. What that means for you and what that means for the arts community, going back to my point about how we very much aspire to push the boundaries and be innovative about how we are giving back and thinking about what are the intangible assets that we can bring to the table. Consider the fact, as I said earlier, we sell a ticket is sold every second on StubHub. We know a great deal about ticketing and pricing. And so something that intrigues me is the idea of what kind of insights can we extrapolate from that could be of use to arts organizations, whether it's for your own ticketed kind of performance events or even fundraising events. Is there a way that we could play a role in lending insights about ticket pricing? Another one, and then I pose that question to you again because I'm always very open and interested in hearing directly from nonprofits about, you know, what are ways that we can be of use and give back. By the way, the best email address to reach me is community@stubhub.com. Collective impact also jumps out at me. I think that there is a criticism that is lodged at the corporate sector, and corporate social responsibility has been at this point, I would say it's fairly ubiquitous. I mean, there aren't a lot of large companies left who aren't at least giving it some degree of focus, which is a good thing, and consumers are demanding it, which is also a good thing. But I think there's criticism lodged at the corporate sector that everyone kind of has their own unique program and there isn't all that much collaboration, and I think that's a very fair point. And so that's something that I would like to see us kind of challenge ourselves as a company to think more about. How can we work in a collaborative way to have a larger kind of collective impact? But I would also kind of pose it back to you. I can tell you from my standpoint, it's frankly kind of bewildering to keep track of all of the different organizations that are out there and who does what and in what ways you work together and don't. And so it would make our job easier to kind of suss that out and figure out how we can best add value if we were a little more clear on what type of collaboration is happening in the community within the nonprofit sector.
There's an initiative that's happening right now that's driven by Mark Vogel that is doing a mapping of the arts and culture sector in the Bay Area, which is going to be really helpful, especially to me, being a newcomer. So keep an eye out on that. I've seen a model out there. He's doing work in a number of cities. Detroit is the first kind of template that he's used, and the way that the map works is pretty interesting. I guess if I can jump in here around place making, my notion around that is kind of bringing it back around to affordable housing and affordable facilities is a notion around place keeping, I guess, and we're looking at ways that that communities can remain where they're at, where people can remain where they're at, where organizations can remain embedded within the community that they serve. Many of the organizations that I've been having conversations with, they understand who they're serving. They understand what their cultural cores and corridors look like. What they're struggling against is being able to stay where they're at. So. When I look at it kind of as in the long view and having worked in Native communities and being a member of the Pasquayaqui tribe, is, we've been here for a millennium and we don't need to make a place, we have a place. And so I would transfer that kind of understanding to historic neighborhoods in the Bay Area. In terms of collective impact. The Hewlett Foundation, generally most of our funding goes to general operating support. We're a firm believer across all of our programs in supporting organizations with monies that are non-discretionary, multi-year grants, and collective impact is not always easy to measure, but we know that when organizations can stay afloat through these monies, that we kind of have this bigger picture. We all rise and fall all the time.
And I just want to add that the project Reuben mentioned that Mark Vogel is working on is called Sustain Arts, and you can learn more about it at sustainarts.org. It's done in partnership with the Hauser Center at Harvard and the Foundation Center, actually. And I think he'll be doing some focus groups in November, and we're hoping to have him update us probably in the new year, I think is the last I heard, where he might be ready to come and show something. So stay tuned.
I wanted to go next just because I agree with Reuben, and one of the things that, I wrote it down because I had heard the placemaking concept, and I said, yes, that resonates a lot more than the placemaking. And part of what we're looking at is trying to see how we can dive deeper into looking at these organizations, which we're calling artistic hubs. So it's a cohort of 15 organizations, small to mid-size, and that are serving, much like Reuben talked about, centers, cores, also places where the community can come together, places where people from different cultures and different age groups can call their own, and trying to figure out how does putting those 15 organizations, those directors and boards together, how can they help each other in terms of peer learning, and also how can we give them technical assistance, and then how can we also bring them to the attention of our donors, because our donors tend to be a little bit more supportive of larger institutions, but bringing them more visibility that way so that donors can see the great work that they're doing and the impact that they're having on these neighborhoods that then impact the whole region. And to Reuben's point about evaluation, trying to figure out what that looks like for these kinds of organizations where it's not only just about the numbers of who comes and how many people they serve, but looking at it, what is the value they bring, to that community, and in a way supporting an organization as a means to support the community, and how we can get it across to funders that if we lose these organizations, we're going to lose more than just an arts organization. And so how can we do that with them, and evaluation that's created in partnership with them? So as one of the persons that's helping us with this, Maria Rosario Jackson, has said, that evaluation shouldn't be done to you, it should be done with you. Mm-hmm. So that concept, I think, really will resonate really well in terms of trying to figure out what does collective impact look like when you bring in those organizations to help evaluate and be part of that process as well.
Okay, well, I was going to, let's see, to me, the most memorable line from the Grantmakers in the Arts Conference was, I think, said by Reuben's former colleague at Tucson Pima Arts Council, which was, creative placemaking is the gentrification of community development. Yeah. So you can use that. But, having said that, the Creative Work Fund got some money from Art Place 3 years ago, and it was specifically to support projects in what was at that time a broader geographic scope that we had, places that were truly underserved, and we made some grants in Tracy, Modesto, Stockton, Hollister, and Occidental. And I learned a lot from that, which would come back to this very theme about placekeeping as opposed to placemaking, that the ones that didn't work so well were well-meaning artists showed up to try to fix something that was not so successful. But when artists really had a kind of rooted relationship to a place over time and managed to get the development of their project to give them a conversation with the local city council, the mayor, the business council, those were the ones that ended up being, I think, really meaningful and to have a long-term benefit. I would add a couple things to the list, and this is with full respect to StubHub and all the other tech people, Those of us in the independent foundation world are trying to be disruptors. And I don't actually think we wear that hat very well, but we use the word. Engagement has been around for about 2 years, but it's still a buzz, and everything is vibrant. And the other one that comes up in our board meetings is ROI, return on investment. Like, what's the cost per kid in this program? How does that compare to the cost per kid in this other program? Is it indeed of value, or is indeed the investment too great for the outcome? And I personally am squeamish about this particular ROI conversation because the cost of investing in a young person who's had a deeply troubled life is generally greater than the cost per kid in a family where both parents are at home, and there's some structure and support for that young person. And nobody has said, oh, we're going to give up on the kids who've been in juvenile hall, we're going to give up on the kids who've really gotten have had deep troubling experiences, been trauma victims, etc. But that worries me. So.
And one trend we've observed at the Foundation Center is that foundations are increasingly doing initiative-based or strategic grant making, so narrowing portfolios, and that means that it's a little bit less about proposal writing and more about positioning an organization to be invited to submit a request. So that makes it challenging for those of us at the Foundation Center to figure out how to advise wannabe grantees. So how would you all advise wannabe grantees of your organizations on how they should be positioning themselves? Because often the proposal is the last step of a longer cultivation process, or a process of awareness on behalf of those inside the foundation that they're going to invite an organization into the fold.
You're in a position right now because you have us here.
Exactly.
And it's all about relationship building, getting to know the program officers that you have at your side. And if you don't know them or you're not around them, then contact the foundation. Here's my card. Take it. Come talk to me. I'm happy to talk to you about ways that you can get into our program. Attend conferences. It's the foundation world is different than the government funding world in that there's, I'm hesitant to say this because it's a critique, but the transparency is less obvious in the foundation world. And so in that regard, there's more discretion in terms of foundation funding, more funding that's driven towards initiative, but regardless, it's always about relationship building and knowing who you're working with there. So if you don't know somebody or you're having problems getting in the door, even by contacting the foundation, because a lot of times it's not very obvious how you get in contact with them. Find somebody that you might know, a peer organization that might receive funding from a foundation that you're interested in, and ask them who they're working with. And then in terms of that relationship to them, we also are privileged to sit in a position where we also know other funders. I knew Francis before I came here. I knew Tere before I came here. We all know funders at the national level and the local level. And so when you have our ear, ask us who else you might consider. We can take a look at who funding that you're pursuing now and maybe suggest other places that you can go.
Other ideas?
Well, I was just going to add that I think, and you probably have heard this and probably nauseous about it, but doing the homework ahead of time, because you don't know how many times, I get requests for someone whose budget is over $2 million, and then I have to let them know that the guidelines are very clear, and I'm sorry, we can't do $2 million. So I think that it makes a very good impression when you can approach us and say, I understand from having reviewed your guidelines or looked at prior grantees that you are interested in whatever it is. And, and we have a program that we think aligns perfectly with what you're trying to do, and we'd like to share it with you. In our case, we don't do, rolling grants. We have one application process a year, but it is open. It is an open responsive cycle, which is how we call it. But it is, like I said, you have to have those budget, you have to be within the budget qualifications. And we also look at ways to bring in applications so that you're not doing a lot of work initially. So for the first time, we're going to open it after January 2nd. You'll have a month to submit a much abbreviated application form, which is the entire application, but just certain parts of it. So we can actually see whether or not you are aligning with what we are looking for. Then if you are, we'll let you know. You'll have another month to complete the entire application. So for those of you where the alignment is not there, we're not going to ask you to send us all of your board lists, your audits, but financial statements. It's less work for you, and I think it'll make the process more efficient for us. So we're trying that out for this coming year, but it is an open cycle. So every year we're going to stay committed to receiving applications.
The one thing, and we do not currently have an initiative, but when we've had them, it's because we wanted to learn something about a particular arena, potentially to open it up in the future. And so we're looking for organizations that do really good work, but we're also looking for organizations that play well with others, because we're going to want to get them together to be part of an evaluation, to work with us, and so I think one of the challenges in the arts is we spend a lot of time differentiating ourselves from others of our choreography, our whatever it is, to be the lone genius. And in fact, when it comes to facing a funder that's doing a lot of strategic, very focused grant making, that actually can be a challenge, where you have to demonstrate that you want to be part of strengthening the dance field as a whole, or looking deeply at a certain kind of after-school program. Are you the right ones to do that? So that's not only getting yourself introduced to foundation people just so they're aware of you, but also to demonstrate in your work that you can be a good partner.
And Emma.
Yeah, so again, I think it's a little bit different coming from the standpoint of a company. The best advice that I would give is, for some reason, corporations are always lumped with foundations, but we're actually quite dissimilar. I think we're a little bit more like a major donor, and I've worked in fundraising, and I sometimes kind of lament that no one ever stewards our relationship as you would a major donor, and little things make such a big difference. So remember, at the end of the day, a big reason that companies do allocate charitable dollars is to drive employee engagement. That is so vital. And tiny things like a thank you letter, photographs. When I get those from organizations we support, I send them to the entire company, and it really means a lot. So I'm not saying spend a lot of time, but remember that we're human beings at the end of the day. Corporations can be these faceless entities, but that engagement and sort of that stewardship can really make a big difference. And in the same way, I would say I received countless sponsorship requests. And I actually attended a corporate social responsibility conference not too long ago, and the topic of sponsorships came up. There were probably like 40 CSR people in the room, and someone posed the question, like, who here is doing sponsorships? Not one person raised their hand. So my sort of public service announcement to nonprofits is companies aren't really that interested in sponsorships and just putting our logo on things. Again, from the standpoint of a fairly large company, we're like this much of eBay, but I don't even really have a way to report to my chief marketing officer that we got logo recognition that, had a couple, tens of thousands of eyeballs. Like, we don't even have a metric for that. So, that's nice, but that's not really what we're looking for. I talked a little bit earlier about storytelling. I would rather a nonprofit approach me and say, I understand you are trying to appeal to this audience. Here's our story. We work with this type of audience. Are there ways that we can collaborate and build something together? And I would say that most successful partnerships that we have were crafted in collaboration. It wasn't that someone came to us with a fully baked proposal that we just wrote a check for. So it's good news and bad news. The good news is you don't need to spend time creating fully baked plans to shop around to companies. I just don't think that's the best use of your time. The better use is do your homework and understand the personality of this business and where there might be some alignment.
Great, thank you, Emma. We're about to open it up for Q&A, so remember to line up if you have a question, and the usual ground rules apply. Just to recap them, initially please keep it to one question per person so we can get to as many of you as possible. Let us know if the question is for a particular panelist or the panel as a whole. And this is a pitch-free zone, so that means any question that requires a great deal of preamble or specific detail about you or your organization isn't appropriate for the forum. And we ask you to keep your questions general in nature so your colleagues in the room can all benefit. So with that, please go ahead and walk up, and we will take our first question.
Hi, I'm Jessica Mealy. I'm the Executive Director at Performing Arts Workshop. I know some of you. We're a 49-year-old arts education organization based here in San Francisco. So my question is kind of, I'm getting this sense, I was at the Arts Town Hall too, and there was a lot of talk about housing, little talk about arts education with Prop C. And I get this sense that San Francisco is like the housing crisis and the income inequality here is like the nonprofit sector's problems on steroids. Like it amplifies existing problems in the nonprofit sector. So things like salaries and the lack of retirement benefits for nonprofit employees and the high cost of staying in a community that you know and are a part of. And I'm curious, is that true? Like from the national perspective, are these issues that are coming up elsewhere and merely amplified here? And you've mentioned some really great local solutions like CAST and some encouragement to for co-location for nonprofits. I'm wondering if there are any good solutions outside of the Bay Area. I think we tend to be a little bit in a bubble here. So thanks.
And this might be a good way to bring in some of what you all learned from the Grantmakers in the arts. Since I'm imagining some of this was mentioned there, so I'll let whoever
want to go. Okay. Well, there certainly are. I am in complete agreement, Jessica, that the inherent weaknesses of the sector are really exacerbated by the crisis, and a big conversation in grant making, and it's something that Tere has really embraced in her portfolio, is this question about capitalization, about how foundations have encouraged organizations year after year to be frugal, to break even, and now they have no operating reserve to fall back on if they suddenly have a crisis of some kind, and that was very short-sighted of us. The country is not booming consistently. So, there's Detroit and there's Brooklyn and San Francisco. They're very different stories based on where nonprofits were. So I went to the presentation at Grantmakers in the Arts about CAST, and everybody wanted Steve Oliver to move to their city. And, it was like there was a lot of interest in that, but mostly from foundations in Philadelphia, New York. I would say that what you're alluding to goes back to this conversation about how foundations need to be looking at building a stronger capital support system. And by capital, at this moment, I don't mean the kind of capital that the Haas Fund does, which is building bricks and mortar, but actually investing in people's depreciation costs, they're having a cash reserve, those kinds of things that are not very glamorous, but ultimately at the end of the day mean that the organizations can thrive. And I don't want to hold the mic for too long, but I think the most distressing session I went to at the conference, which was about what had happened with the big capitalization initiative in Philadelphia, where there's been a lot of interest and very thoughtful work And 5 years later, the organizations had not grown their audience. They had decreased their individual donors. They had increased their dependency on foundations. It was like everything you didn't want to have happen was some of the smartest and most focused attention to this very situation of what do we do to give people money just to be able to be a strong, robust entity. So.
Anybody else have anything to add?
She covered it.
Okay.
Very well.
Alas.
And great first question, great role model. For the rest of you, no pressure.
I just have a question for Frances Phillips. While you were talking, I was just writing down notes, and you mentioned something about grants to after school, and I kind of missed it. You know, your foundation looks at grants to after school programs. Is that it?
That's true. We make the Walter and Elise Haas Fund makes grants to mostly arts organization providing high quality arts learning experiences for kids out of school, generally after school hours. 501c3 focused in San Francisco and Alameda County, and our big emphasis in that is programs that are really accessible to low-income kids.
Okay. And you're going to the Institute of Contemporary Arts this evening in San Jose?
Yes, and didn't you already come to a Creative Work Fund workshop, but you just can't get enough of it?
It's the same thing.
I'd love to see you.
If it's the same thing, I don't need it.
It's the same thing.
Hi, my name is Emma Spurtis. I don't know if you can hear me. I run a small residency program at a studio in Oakland called Real Time and Space, and I was interested in the panel sort of discussion or how their foundations work with critical development in the arts, because I feel like I didn't hear much discussion of that, and it's something personally interesting to me, so I wanted to put that to the panel.
Could you define
And what do you mean by critical development?
Well, just sort of the artist piece, the part where artists are, pushing their art forms and, not necessarily giving back to communities, but working on
more
their own.
art for art's sake.
Yeah.
So you're talking about artistic development.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm part of a sort of a underground of alternative spaces and artist-run spaces, and I feel like our one major sort of supporter has been Southern Exposure through the Andy Warhol Foundation, and I'm just wondering if that could be grown or other partners could. I mean, there's so many great ideas and projects happening in the arts for art's sake, and I just was wondering how you guys are going to deal with that.
Yeah, I guess what's trending now is that community engagement. And part of that, I think, came out of the economic downturn and really wanting to ask artists to think about what impact they were having in their community, however they defined it. Maybe that's in part due to shrinking dollars and the ROI that Frances was talking about, which is less kind of self-evident when you're talking about artist practice, not necessarily as social practice, but just as a studio practice or whatever you want to call it. So, but what I've been hearing is a lot of pushback from artists around that. In part because in some ways we've asked artists to take on a really big role, to be therapists and social workers and community organizers, and it's not easy. And I had one artist from a Native American collective called Post Commodity said, "You're expecting us to turn ourselves into broke nonprofits," and which is something that we don't need in the world, and it really takes away from their creative practice. And it takes away from it defines the artist as a community organizer as opposed to an agent of maybe providing just a platform for a conversation, not necessarily as responding to an issue and trying to fix it in some way. So I guess in terms of what Hewlett does in supporting the intermediaries, we're looking to those intermediary organizations to define the way that they're providing support to individual artists. Some of them are looking just at artistic practice. Some of them, like the Creative Work Fund, are looking at the ways that artists engage inside their communities. So there's a number of different strategies at play. So. And
Francis, do you want to share about the Creative Work Fund? Since you can actually budget for artists in that portfolio.
Yes, and this is not going to be the answer that you're looking for, because it's like, personally, I'm very interested in supporting the development of emerging or artists at any point in their career. If we think of the Haas Fund as having this arts program with this four-legged stool, it's like access for kids, access for adults, access for people who are wrestling with the fragility of being recent immigrants, and then this one leg of the stool that's about supporting artists to make new work. The Creative Work Fund grants are up to $40,000, and 2/3 of the money is supposed to go to pay the artist or artists or cover their direct expenses like studio costs, materials, supplies, that kind of thing. So that piece of our program is about artist support. If board interest were to change someday, maybe we could do more. And I love that Southern Exposure program. I think it's really vital and interesting.
And Tere?
No, that's okay. We'll keep. I want to keep moving because I know we want to get to everybody.
All right, come on up.
Can you hear me?
You might want to pull it up closer to you.
I guess I am a little tall. Good morning. My name is Wanda Ravernell, and I represent a new nonprofit of NERA Institute. We just got our 501c3 from the federal government.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I don't know whether this is necessarily a question or a challenge, but it seems to me that from what I was hearing this morning, you were talking about, almost everyone talked about being interested in serving marginalized and underprivileged youth, adults, minority organizations, and so forth. And yet, for at least a couple of you, the budget requirements for being able to apply to something is like $100,000. And so how many of these small organizations who are just starting, like myself, it seems to me that we don't qualify. And it will take a number of years for us to be able to qualify for that. And then it would be, how can we hang on long enough in order to do that? So, and then also I think the young lady next to Reuben, you mentioned that there were 12 smaller organizations that you work with that deal, if I understood you right, that deal with smaller groups that don't quite have that amount of money. And I'd like to know if you could elaborate on that.
And Emma, I know since you need to leave a little bit early, I'll let you respond to the smaller group question, and then I'll throw the rest of it to the rest of the panel.
Sure. I'm trying to think what I was referring to, the 12 organizations. In terms of our Rising Stars program, we do have about 10 or 12 grantees represented in that program. So keep in mind, this program itself is relatively nascent. It was launched in 2013. And so the organizations that we support, it's about one per market across 12 markets. And to give you a sense, I think you make a very fair and interesting point. The organizations that we support, I would define as local and kind of smaller grassroots because they're well under $1 million. They vary from, I would say, probably like $500,000 budgets. A couple, there's one organization we supported that truly was just kind of launching, and so our grant support was kind of that first boost. To be honest with you, we don't have really strict parameters around the specific scope and scale of the organization. It really has to do with kind of more of the alignment. So we don't deliberately not include organizations of a certain size, but yeah, I guess it's not quite that scientific.
So there's no floor, which is...
Exactly, there's no floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
The way that I came up with 100,000 was because, like I said, I took a whole year to kind of look at what was being funded. I was also looking at the reality, which was that my predecessor had I had a little less than half of what he had when he was, doing the portfolio. So he was very much about a very wide cast net approach. And so we had, the first year I was there, I had applications from a PTA at a school with a budget of $5,000 who wanted new instruments, all the way to the symphony at, $118 million budget a year. And I knew it worked for him because he had more funds, but I was looking at the trend that was going to be happening if I kept that same wide net approach with, like I said, a little less than half of what he had. And that was that I was going to be looking at $5,000 grants, period. And I felt if I'm looking for impact, if I'm going to look for social justice, then I do have to limit the scope of what I'm going to be able to fund so I can get those grants up to at least 15 to 20, because then I can at least say, even within a small organization, 15 to 20,000 of your budget, if that's I'm going to have some kind of impact. I mean, I don't think there's any funder who can claim total impact because our grants are small relative to budget sizes. And also looking at this question of capitalization, it's like, how could we help those organizations get strong, and not just, as Francis was saying, I don't want just organizations to feel great about, oh my God, I didn't run a deficit. I want them to start thinking about surpluses. I want them to start thinking about reserves and what does that mean. And so when you look at that, you have to look at a certain size of an organization where then that can be helpful, because there is some staff, there is some board development there that can help with that process. So you're right, in a way we are looking at, there is an exclusion. So I am excluding everybody under 100,000, but I'm also excluding everybody above 2 million. And so I got it from both sides, believe me. But I think at some point, like I said, just looking around and saying, what could we as a foundation, where could our impact be? We're going to look and see how that works. It may be that 5-10 years from now, we're going to say, well, it worked or it didn't work. I would love to have more, 5 times the budget I have now. And then I can certainly think about, okay, now let's open it up.
No, that's okay. We don't have a floor. I will say, I sometimes say about our foundation, we like to boldly go where others are going. And it's pretty hard for me to award a grant if we would be the only foundation funder. So, there are some smaller grants, and I realize small amounts of money don't get you as far, but the Zellerbach Family Foundation's Community Arts Program, there's the CASH program. I would be a Pollyanna if I didn't agree with you that it's hard to get started, but we have come in early on some organizations, and we don't have a budget size rule. So.
Come on up.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker. And this question is for Emma. I was wondering if you could talk more about what kind of stories appeal to you. And you mentioned your 1 million viewers per day, and that, even reaching that kind of audience would be amazing. So if you could talk about ways in which that kind of partnership would work.
Yeah, so I think the best example is one of my favorite organizations that we work with. It's called the Roots of Music, and they're actually based in New Orleans. What they are is a middle school marching band program outside of the school system. So it's a nonprofit. The concept is they're providing a safe place for students to go during peak juvenile crime hours after school, but at the same time they're actually building a world-class marching band and helping to preserve the cultural heritage of New Orleans. And so they bus kids in from all over New Orleans Parish. And so I was in New Orleans a couple of years ago. StubHub does a big event around the Super Bowl every year, and so we were preparing for our big Super Bowl event in New Orleans. And as part of that, thinking about what's something more enduring that we can leave in this community. And so I met with a number of different organizations, and I was actually introduced to the Roots of Music through the Greater New Orleans Community Foundation. So again, community foundations, time and again, have proven to be a really valuable resource to us. And the Roots of Music, I guess what jumped out about them was the organization had gotten so far with so little and was so embraced by the local kind of music community, and that was really a part of why it was so successful. And I remember some of the things that jumped out to me about it were that they were only a few years old and they already had a wait list of more than 500 children, and they didn't do any kind of marketing. It was just word of mouth among the children. And then on top of that, the fact that they were so good. I mean, these kids blew me away. They were so talented. And also, as I said, the fact that the music community of New Orleans was so supportive and kind of involved with this organization. So to me, it was like a great example of an organization that was very much of and for that community and so distinctly New Orleans. And so that sums up to me what I think we look for in every market is what is an organization that's really making a difference and is of and for this community. And then on top of that, I think it was the fact that they had never had a corporate funder before. So it was an opportunity for us to really have a transformative impact. So we gave them a $100,000 grant, which was by far the largest they had ever gotten. And it was very tangible and clear to us what our impact was. And then and in turn, that we could communicate onward to our employees and to customers and let them kind of share in that. So to that point, kind of using our platform, one of the things we did was we produced a mini documentary. It's about 3 minutes long about the Roots of Music. You can look it up on YouTube. Just Google the Roots of Music and StubHub. And this was not about StubHub at all. This was about the organization. And we put it out on all of our channels, so on our site, through our social channels. We lent advertising inventory to drive traffic to this film, and we set a goal. We released it a week before the Super Bowl, knowing that, we see a surge in traffic around the Super Bowl, but everybody already knows to look at StubHub for Super Bowl tickets. Like, we don't really need to communicate that. So it was a way for us to kind of lend that and lend our advertising inventory to just drive traffic to this film and to drive views. And the goal was to get to 50,000 views before Super Bowl Sunday, in which case we would donate 50,000. We'd already given them 50,000. Of course, we were going to give them 50,000, regardless. And so we did that. We got well over 50,000 views, and so hopefully, it was a way that we were able to lend them some really valuable exposure. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, just one example of how we work, with a Rising Star partner.
And Emma, I know you have to go do a webinar. She's actually doing double duty today. Her next gig is speaking for Americans for the Arts in a live webinar. But the good news for all of you is it will be recorded, I think. So I think at Americans for the Arts you can learn more. And did you want to say your email one last time before you disappear?
Yes. So community@stubhub.com is the best way to reach me. And if you're interested in learning more about our CSR efforts more generally, just go to stubhub.com/community. And one thing that I meant to mention earlier in terms of how to reach us, we do always welcome emails from organizations just so that you're on our radar. But we have on our site at the /community, it outlines specifically what we're looking for. Basically like mission statement, brief summary, organization size, that type of thing. We deliberately keep it very simple because we don't want you to spend a lot of time if it's not going to be a fit. So that's a way to at least make sure you're on our radar, and then, the conversation could continue.
Great. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think it's an interesting question that the attendee mentioned about what stories you all find compelling, because certainly storytelling is an important part of proposal writing. And so if you could kind of think about that for a minute and talk about any recent effective strategies that kind of moved you in the way somebody crafted their story.
Well, I can give one, and this is actually one I think maybe we all fund, but the East Bay Center for the Performing Arts, which is in Richmond. And it got started back in the late 70s, so it's been going on for a while. But it was and at that time, one of the sort of overarching reasons for supporting it. And we were actually, I wasn't there, but we were actually one of the first grantors, funders to the East Bay Center for the Performing Arts back in the early 80s. And that had to do with somebody's had the vision of providing a space in Richmond, which at that time was the region's murder capital. And in an area where, at the time I did a site visit, I used to be with the State Arts Council and oversaw all the organizational grant program for them. And going there and seeing, I mean, there wasn't even sidewalks, there was hardly anybody on the streets, but yet when you walked into the center, it was just buzzing with activity. They were having students everywhere because there wasn't like separate little studio spaces. It was just this big space with a lot of kids and the parents waiting patiently for them. At that time, it was mostly African American. Now, fast forward to, if you want to go visit it, I would really encourage you to. They were able to buy their own building. They got city support. It was obviously helped a lot to have redevelopment, but also through the Northern California Community Loan Fund and foundation support. So they have gutted the building. It has a theater. It has individual rehearsal spaces. They not only do performing, when they don't do just in the performing arts music, but they also have theater and dance. And you go there and now you see there's Asian children, there's Latinos, the parents are in and out. I mean, and the level of activity is still there, but obviously, much, much higher. They have professional faculty now that come there and I mean professional, not that the ones before that were not professional, but they didn't make a living teaching there, and now there's actual faculty that get paid and have health services. So I think that to me is a really great story about what investing in a space that really saw what the potential could be. And now the streets are paved. They have a little park next door that they use for activities as well. There's businesses that have moved in, restaurants. I mean, it just has activated the space in a way that I think is good because it was a center that grew out of, obviously, the people that live there. Everyone that works there lives in Richmond, including the director who grew up in Richmond. And so I think those are the kinds of stories that I think really reverberate for me in terms of what we can do as a community foundation. And not that we can claim the whole impact because we're not the only sole funder, but I think just to know that we had a piece of that story is a really good one.
Reuben, Francis, anything to add on the storytelling question?
Well, the things I find the most compelling are the ones that it's kind of hard for you folks to tell me, because I'm most interested in the ones that are not mediated by the nonprofit organization but come more spontaneously, like from a school principal or a parent. I mean, I'll embarrass Jessica, who asked a question, so you met her briefly. Just that they have an annual event performance on stage with a bunch of the kids who've been in their program, and it was a charming event. I like seeing it. But the thing that was much more interesting to me was the nature of the conversation among the parents in the lobby before the event started, where they were so excited about their kids being there. There was such a positive buzz that was coming because of what the organization did, but nobody was telling those people to tell me those things. And that's what really resonated.
I guess I mean, the anecdotal is really, that's really important. Those kind of interpersonal stories are part of your beginning relationships to organizations and continuing into your reporting about your successes. But another level too is in part of your story is are the LOIs and grant applications that you turn in, and so there's kind of like an institutional kind of story, and so part of that is grantsmanship. We're always looking at some kind of stability, some demonstration of effective programming. We're looking at what audiences are being served, and then how that matches up to what our criteria are. And so, again, coming informed about what the criteria are and what, where and who we're interested in serving is really important. And then as you begin to develop that more personal relationship, when when we visit, whether it's a potential grantee or a current grantee, there's always somebody at the table that's telling a story about the impact of the programming on their lives, and that's really important for us to hear. It tends to kind of build confidence in that. Then we move away from the application. We still stay in that paper world, throughout the course of our relationship with an organization, but it also becomes much more about what we're seeing face to face, on the ground, with participants, with audiences, with artists, and with administrators. If you're feeling shaky about leadership, that can start to threaten the relationship in some way, or if there's some transition that's happening, whether it's in programming or those can tend to kind of to put red flags into that conversation. So it's a little more technical, I guess, a little more institutional, maybe, but it's a reality too. And so I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't exist.
And we have one last question.
Hi, I'm Jessica Zeidman. I'm the Director of Development with Stir and Grow Festival. So just have a question for the whole panel. We've really noticed in the past few years the trend away from general operating support. Luckily, all three of your foundations do general operating, but we've really noticed both on a small foundations, large foundations, regionally and nationally, the trend away from general operating and more towards project-specific, new works, new projects, new commissions. Just want to get your thoughts from your colleagues and other conferences you attend on why is that, and what can organizations that are do what they do great and are looking for foundations to support that.
I don't have a good answer because we trended more toward it rather than away from it. That might be eccentric to a handful of people in the Bay Area. I would say one, and I don't want to get off topic, but Kickstarter, Indiegogo, those things are very interesting tools and phenomena, but they definitely drive you to project-specific, product-specific kinds of fundraising. And, with Kickstarter giving more to the arts last year than the NEA did, that's a concern to me, that what I thought was a very long, hard, slow climb toward capacity building, general operating, core support, all of those kinds of things in the nonprofit arts world, which shows up in the Foundation Center's research on arts funding. There's been a gradual improvement, but this change in the individual giving world to make it very project-specific, that's different from what has been traditional relationships with major donors, and concerning to me. But others can disagree with it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure because, like I said, I did a survey and that was what I was told, is that's what the good, practice is now, to go to general operating. So I'm not quite sure which which foundations would do that. I think I can only speculate that if you're really about and deep into impact, I think that's where you get projects, because you can then say, if I gave you $50,000 in order to do that specific program, then I can say, okay, I made that happen. Now tell me how successful it was. Whereas if I give you $50,000 and it goes into general operating, you maybe pay the rent, the gas, the gas bill or whatever, I can't really say I've had impact. So that's the only thing I can speculate, is that it's sort of a tendency, and I think we do it, when you give a donation to something, if somebody says, please donate so these kids can go to this thing, you feel like, oh, okay, I'm going to make that possible, versus help me to pay the phone bill. I think that may be what's driving some of this.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
General operating support's not sexy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, when foundations are looking to measure impact around, they're looking at social change more intensively now, And so that comes through project support. This is a project that's going to address a specific topic that the foundation is interested in. And again, I saw that kind of trend out of the economic downturn, where the foundations were really they were losing money for one, so they had to like kind of look at the money that they did have and then look at ways that it was impacting the community. And so they're looking at organizations that were doing that work on the ground. Granted, you can take money from project support and add it into your administrative costs, and smart foundations are going to give you something beyond the project support. But yeah, I think that's kind of part of that trend in terms of the foundation world. I even saw that kind of happening a bit in the government funding world too. Just because there was less money there, you know, it was kind of this interesting resource availability thing. But we do see that too, and I mean we've been doing GOS forever, and we even do it in places where we are looking at specific, where we are responding to needs in a community and doing a lot of responsive grant making. But we know that supporting an organization through general operating support is going to make them give them the capacity to be more effective in addressing that issue. But you know, that hasn't always been in play. I think I'm hoping that trend stays upward, moving towards GOS. But you know, we hope that some of the general operating support that we're providing doesn't always have to go towards keeping the lights on or building new staff, that it can go into expanding or deepening programming. Not always the case, but yeah, you know, the nonprofit is a misnomer. It doesn't mean that you're not a business. And like, if you opened up a small business, you have to pay your employees and you have to provide insurance, and it's a legal requirement. Yet in the nonprofit world, it's not. You can, you know, it's basically like, you know, it's some kind of I don't know. They're sweatshops in a way, you know.
Sweat equity.
Yeah, and yeah, some kind of wrong. And that's always been at play in the arts in this country, and part of that is built around social policy. And you know, you look at countries like Canada or New Zealand, where there's heavy investment in the arts, and a long time that's the way that it was happening in Europe too. But so you know, I think it's part of the fabric of our nation not to really consider the arts as an important sector to you know, to building a more healthy society.
And this reminds me that I want to put in a reminder to folks about the good work done around the overhead myth, because that is a strategy for organizations to consider when you are getting project support, to make sure to include a percentage for overhead. And there's a lot of great work being done by groups like Cal Nonprofits and BridgeSpan and Nonprofit Finance Fund around educating nonprofits about pushing back when funders say that they'll only cover a certain percentage of overhead. So if you're not aware of that movement and that work, just Google the overhead myth or go to calnonprofits.org, and you'll see that there's ongoing conversations and kind of a growing interest and awareness among funders to not look for a magic number. And I think it's all of our jobs, for those of us who do fundraising, we are asked to keep our overhead to a certain number, to be aware of the literature and push back a little bit, because not all donors may be aware that that thinking is actually hurting the sector and starving the sector of resources. And with that said, I am afraid we are out of time, and I want to ask you to help me in thanking our panelists for making this program possible.